The most common, frequently asked question is, what's your origin story? What is the comic that hooked you? I thought I'd make a video so I could direct people to it whenever that question arises, because it gets asked a lot. As for my origin, I was always an avid reader of books and comics. I read just about everything and in just about every genre you can think of. In fact, I had read a whole pile of comics in my youth before this specific comic grabbed my attention. Richie Rich? Yep. UFO and Flying Saucers? I read that too. What about Spider-Man, Hot Stuff, Star Wars, and Twilight Zone? Yes, to all. If it was printed in 4 colors on newsprint, that was enough for me. In my hometown, there was a second-hand store. I genuinely have no memory of what it was called, where you could trade in 2 or 3 comics and get one for free. Or you could buy, like, 10 for $1 or something. Anyway, every month or so, my parents would take me to this store, and I'd trade in what I had read, and then get a new stack to read. So I had read many, many different comics before I got to the one that stuck with me. The one that made an impression is Fantastic Four issue 190. It has a classic Jack Kirby cover, one of the last he would do for Marvel. Anyway, at the time, the cover appealed to me, even though I didn't care for Kirby's artwork, not even a little. I'd seen tons of Kirby stuff, especially Commandy, Mr. Miracle, and the Demon, which seemed to be everywhere, but Kirby's abstract dynamic panels just looked too, blocky and unrealistic. It would be many, many years before I evolved an appreciation for Kirby's artwork. That being said, the way the cover is composed is pretty nifty, and I think that's what caught my attention in the first place. The issue itself was written by Marv Wolfman, who, in my opinion, probably has the best name in comics. Honestly, for a long time, I thought that was a made-up name, but it's his actual name, go figure. And it was illustrated by Sal Buscema, with inks by Tony DeZuniga, so it looked pretty good, if not very Marvel House style. I didn't know what it was called back then, but Marvel Comics did look a lot alike, from what I remember. Anyway, it opens on a morose Ben Grimm announcing the Fantastic Four had broken up, which I remember blew my mind. After all, this was a comic that had been around for years. How could this team break up? What the heck was going on? The entire issue itself is a highlight reel of the Fantastic Four's past, from their origin right until the breakup. Basically, it showed how fragile the team had been from the very beginning. Like, they barely tolerated one another and fought all the time. This is underscored by the comic. So, it was a fascinating history lesson about a team that acted like a family and how it all fell apart. Not to get too deep and personal, but that was something I could identify with at that point in my life. My own family dynamic, which was composed of 4 people, was also falling apart. And if you have any self-awareness, regardless of age, you can't help but reflect on what brought everyone to a point where it all starts to fall apart. So Ben Grimm looking through a diary and talking to Alicia about how the Fantastic Four struggled for years was just, again, very identifiable. There are 2 sequences that stuck with me. The first one is where Sue leaves the team and abandons Reed. Then Reed gets a repulsive, tough guy attitude and decides to replace anyone that leaves, which seemed kind of mean. But the one scene that made an impression was Reed shooting his son, Franklin, whose power was getting out of control. This basically turned him into a vegetable. It was this action that permanently destroyed the team. Except it didn't, but that's another matter. What mattered was the pain a father caused his son by doing what he thought was the right thing in the moment. You can spend a significant amount of time unpacking that scene and justifying it with a greater good argument, but at the end of the day, a father sacrificed his son's future. For someone who is allegedly brilliant, that seemed like an impulsive, reckless action. My little brain didn't understand the repercussions and implications, but it knew that was a pretty terrible thing to do. What I didn't know was this wasn't the incident that led to the team breaking up. Reed harming Franklin happened much earlier in the series. What led to them breaking up was Reed being possessed by the Molecule Man and going psychotic. Once he's in control again and discovers he can no longer stretch, he resigns and the team breaks up. Again, I wouldn't know this until much later, when I started piecing together a Fantastic Four run. Then I discovered Marv Wolfman had pulled a fast one on me. Well played, Mr. Wolfman. The issue ends with Ben destroying the diary and deciding to move on. It's a pretty grim issue, no pun intended, from beginning to end. What drove this bleak story home was the following issue, where we see the team saying their goodbyes to one another. Their headquarters at the Baxter Building is being dismantled and sold for scrap, and all the members are about to go their separate ways. It's a pretty sobering issue. It's also a big fake-out. The team reunites very briefly to stop a criminal from stealing Reed's technology. But this brief reunion doesn't change their breakup. At the end, in the final panel, they all stare out at the audience, in front of a sign announcing their headquarters are now for rent. Had the series ended there, that would have been the most heartbreaking, perfect panel ever. But from there, the comic kept going. The following issues, leading up to issue 200, were solo stories involving the team. Then they get back together and fight the mastermind who had been manipulating their lives for the past year, Dr. Doom. So eventually, there was a happy ending. It only strikes me now that a Kirby cover bookends that story arc. Interesting. So issue 190 got me interested, and when I saw issue 191, that hooked me for good. I can't say I was impressed with all the solo adventures between issues 192 and 199, but I was fascinated that the Fantastic Four continued to exist. I mean, I was pretty young and easy to impress, but the fact that the comic continued on even when the team was over, well, that broke my little brain. It didn't make sense, but I couldn't stop reading to see what happened next. That's my origin story. A simple recap issue that was a bit morbid in tone was the first comic that changed me from being a casual reader of comics into someone who actively collected them. Considering my current tastes, some might presume it would be an independent title like, say, 8-Ball or Love and Rockets. But discovering interesting, more adult material wouldn't happen for some time. So, my lifelong interest has humble beginnings, one might say. Which is why I always say, like what you like. There's no proper entry point into becoming a fan. It happens however it happens. Additionally, there's no titles that you should like or need to like to prove you're a fan of comics. That's simply ridiculous and stupidly elitist. If someone suggests you don't like comics or your tastes suck because you don't like comics like they do, then they're, well, rather narrow-minded and their opinion is suspect. In this medium, there is room for everyone and everything. The standard for entry, the one that gets you a comic book nerd badge, is simply this. Like what you like, and never mind the bollocks. All that's left to say is, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, comment, and all that good stuff. Additional thanks to all those that directly support this channel and help keep the lights on. I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you.